Welcome, friends. Today we have Roger Atkins with us on the Think Business podcast. And as you know, Think Business podcast is aimed on providing platform for experts like Roger to voice their understanding and advise people on the expertise they have. And in the last 1 year, businesses have experienced quite a roller coaster of a year, and there are a lot of journey and a lot of learnings have happened in the last 1 year, and I would love Roger to give his take on. And just to give a brief on his background, he is an EV specialist. He's an expert who has been talking about EV for the last 15 plus years, and he has roughly 30 years of experience in the auto sector. And not spending too much time, I would want to start to say hi to Roger. Roger, hi, welcome.
Hi, Dev. Lovely to talk to you on planet Earth. I'm over here in Europe. You're over there in Australia. And isn't it wonderful that we can just talk to each other like this? It's just fantastic.
It's the power of internet. And it's very intriguing, your background. Just would want to know what's that specific about 312 days in isolation. What does that mean?
Well, no, it's only in the sense that obviously we're in the point where we're all dealing with a pandemic. Oh, I'm just getting a cup of tea from my wife. I work
That's
in
good.
the garden, actually. Thank
Lovely.
you. Thanks very much. Yeah, cheers. There you are. Look, I've got a cup of tea. So I'm in isolation simply by way of dealing with the pandemic. We're obviously in various parts of the world having to be extremely careful. It's a period in human history which is quite profound.
Yes.
And yeah, there's a bit of a challenge. So I'm in isolation, not technically. I don't have COVID, fortunately. In fact, I had a test for COVID yesterday, and I definitely haven't got it, which was good news.
That's good.
But yeah, this is the thing in here is just a little bit of fun around, trying to not make light of the situation because it's a very challenging situation and for some people pretty catastrophic. But
still, it's intriguing.
Life goes on.
Yeah, it's making it.
Yeah, exactly. Life goes on, Dev.
Yeah, that's good. And I think cheers. And I think in this world and in this last 1 year, things have changed drastically. And climate change has come front and center of the conversation, and most of the economies and the West are talking about climate change. Here in Australia, we are started talking about climate change more seriously. Politicians on the both sides of the aisle are spending a good amount of time to have a climate change policies. We have elections coming in this year, and both the sides have a climate change policy which they are talking about. So just wanted to know more what you feel about where we are at and where is our planet Earth at in terms of climate change.
Yeah, it's a good sort of run through of things. Where I think we're at is this is what happens in a pandemic. It accelerates change that was already underway. It brings things forward. Something that would have taken 10 years will now happen in a year. And the good news, actually, ironically, is most of those things that are going to happen quicker are good things, like fundamentally addressing, man-made accelerated climatic change.
You're right.
Because let's all be straightforward with each other here. If we have a planet where the temperature rises to such a point and all the things that I think most people are beginning to understand occur, everything else is irrelevant. Nothing matters because our very existence is under huge threat and potentially ends up being the end of us. And so can there be nothing more important than that? But of course, human life is a bit more about other mundane things and obvious things like work, like employment, like travel, like, all sorts of things. So all I'd simply say is the discussion and activity now around focus on climate change has just been brought forward by probably what would have taken far too long, maybe just catastrophically too long. And ironically, the pandemic might be the saving of us. It doesn't feel like it. And for some people that will be either annoying or unsettling. But I think this could turn out to be an extraordinary moment for good reason.
And how is United Kingdom taking climate change at this stage in terms of the politics and the industry?
Well, saying a lot of good things, having a net zero ambition as a legal framework,
Yeah.
which is a good thing.
As a legal
So,
framework.
yeah, it
Okay.
absolutely is. Within the changes that emanated from the Paris Accord, the
Yeah.
famous climate change agreement,
Yeah.
across the world, um, we have now been putting things into action. Not enough things, and we still do contradictory things.
Yeah.
So we have, I'm not going to go through a list, but
Yeah.
there are things that really jar with the political declarations,
Yeah.
etc. Um, but it's still a kind of work in progress thing in this country and many others. People are
Yeah.
still, for want of a better phrase, Dev, fumbling for
Yeah.
what exactly can they do as an
You're right.
individual. Can your family do, the
Yeah.
company do, the country do, the
Yes.
planet do, or the world do? Not the planet. The planet's an organic thing, which
Mm.
we can
That's a
see the
good
power
take.
of nature. When nature is able to do what it's done this last 12 months, you
A-
can see that if you get the wrong side of nature, you haven't got a chance. It's going to
And
wipe you out.
and it has touched the minds of the people, not just the the hearts, but it has tried to work on the mindset, what we were living with. We are mortals, but we think as a default that we are immortals. As a default, there is no end to it. But it has touched our mindset. Changing mindsets of the whole of the most of the population is difficult, and that's the nature has done, which is transformational. And I want to know you are an auto expert, and you've been in that space for long. What do you feel specific changes, and what you were talking about, the launch pad, the push, the extra push which COVID gave? What do you feel is the impact in the auto space?
I think it's kind of twofold, really. One, using a privately owned car, because
Yeah,
so many countries have been locked down, people have had their car parked on the drive or in the garage or whatever, and haven't used it, sometimes for weeks, sometimes months on end.
yeah,
And it's made people reflect on, well, why do I have a car? Okay, I'm not using it at all at the moment, or
yeah,
very little, because I'm not going to work, not commuting, all those things
yeah,
perhaps. But that's made people reflect on things. Because cars haven't been out and about in any number, um, the pollution levels in many places has been, dramatically different,
yeah.
and it's got people thinking, well, that's what it would look like. I quite like
Mm,
that. That's a
mm,
good thing. And so if you combine those two things, the utilization of what is an expensive asset, a
yes,
lot of people are leasing cars or in some financial capacity paying a bill every month for
yeah,
something that they don't use.
yes,
It's really kind of put it under a microscope. So I think the two things of electric vehicles,
mm,
and even not owning a vehicle, but sharing a vehicle or having
yeah,
access to a vehicle, has become front of mind
yeah,
for millions,
yeah,
perhaps hundreds of millions, even billions of people
mm,
around the planet all at once.
yeah,
And that's where, as I said earlier, a pandemic condenses things, it accelerates things, it focuses and
mm,
sharpens attention to specific issues.
yeah. Yeah, and what's what are the major changes you're seeing from the car manufacturer point of view?
Well, it's a great question, because it's kind of, look at two sides of the story. You've got one which is incumbents. So in other
Mm,
words, established players, people who've been
mm,
around for decades, some of them
mm,
over 100 years.
mm,
And they've done one thing for all that
mm,
time, and now they're
yeah,
having to shift to do another thing:
yeah,
electrify vehicles, make batteries, find a way of having a business model
mm,
to sell something they've never sold before.
mm,
And then you've got, the disruptors, the companies that haven't got legacy, haven't made anything before other than an electric vehicle.
yeah,
And whilst the metrics and the numbers and the share price and the market capitalization are all mind-bogglingly weird,
yeah,
here we are now with, a disruptor company, Tesla, of
mm,
course, that's who I'm talking about, and its visionary leader, because he absolutely is, individually is now the richest person on the planet. You
yeah,
know, if this doesn't tell people something, if they don't understand what the nexus of renewable energy and therefore storage and
mm,
therefore batteries
mm,
and new mobility and
mm,
therefore electric vehicles and
mm,
batteries, if they can't see how this is coming together, then they're not looking in the right place, or they are, they just can't see it, and they should. It's there for all to
yeah.
see.
And people who are on the fringe on just getting an EV, but they're still pragmatic and rational about things. They would argue saying that you are powering your EV using a coal generated power through the lines, and that the grid
Yep.
has transmission losses. So you have
Yes.
power generated way up north, and then it takes thousands of kilometers to travel to your house, and there are transmission losses. There's so much to be done on the way. And coal fire generated power versus petrol or diesel. What do you feel about that? In that dilemma.
Okay, well, it's less of a dilemma than I think people believe. Let me briefly explain. The advent of electric vehicles is twofold, really. There are two imperatives that it's focused on. One is the reduction of CO2.
Yeah.
We talked about that a moment ago, climate change. The other one is to create clean urban air.
Yeah.
More and more people around the planet live in a town, live in a city, live
Yeah.
in a very big city in the case of, certain countries like India and China and a few other places. So the bigger issue for a lot of people right now is the tailpipe, what comes out of the thing at the back, the exhaust pipe. Even in clean vehicles, which are made today, relatively clean, I use the term relative, is very important. Euro 6 compliant diesel or petrol vehicles still have a tailpipe.
Yeah.
They still create emissions. There is still an internal combustion process going on inside the engine. And yes, there are all sorts of processes and technologies to make that as clean as it's ever been, but it's still not 100% clean.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, when the vehicle's new or being tested in a laboratory under certain conditions, to benchmark standards. But once the vehicle becomes a year old, 5 years old, 6, 7, 8 years old, once it hasn't been looked after properly, perhaps, then it won't be as efficient as it was designed to be, and it will have that tailpipe, and it will pollute, and it will trigger, SOx and NOx and other airborne pollutants that trigger all sorts of pretty horrendous things with people. So
that's a good.
So regardless of what we'd call the long tailpipe, Dev, where that energy is being manufactured, coal-fired power station or whatever, if at the tailpipe end, there isn't a tailpipe, that's got to be a good thing. That fully addresses one of those twin imperatives.
Yeah, and there's a new kid on the block, hydrogen. Australia's chief scientist, Alan Finkel, has been talking about hydrogen for last few years. And we have something called National Hydrogen Strategy. So we have a full paper which talks about, our, view on hydrogen, how we plan to invest, and what we want to do. And following the National Hydrogen Strategy, we have a statewide hydrogen plan or a strategy. As in every state, so we have 8 states and territories. Every state and territory have their own hydrogen plan, which caters to their local industries. So they're talking more about hydrogen from large scale, renewable. So what's your take, not just from an auto point of view, but to talk about hydrogen as a renewable source?
This is a really good question, and increasingly, an increasingly asked question. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a scientist, so I can only comment on from observation, not from a clear basis of factual evidence. But what I do know is this: you should look for solutions to any problem. They should be application-specific solutions. You should try and avoid being tribal and having a view that, well, it's all batteries, or it's all fuel cells, or it's all whatever. The world is complex. Human life is complex, and that some remedies for some individuals is not a remedy for someone else. And it's the same for transport and energy storage. So to answer your question specifically, I think what we're seeing emerge is that hydrogen, and there are different forms of hydrogen, of course. There are at least 4 colors of it. There's blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, brown hydrogen, etc. And finding the right solution.
Just to stop you there, there's a different definition of, just to stop you there, there's a different definition in Australia across the states what brown hydrogen means. So,
okay.
So again, there is another sub-layer of definitions on hydrogen.
Yeah, well, and And like I say, though, the important thing, Dev, I think, is to not get tribal about this.
Yeah.
It is to look at the science, to look at the evidence-based stuff, and it should be application specific. So
Yeah.
in that regard, it seems to be that for cars, I think this is highly unlikely for a number of reasons, which, you know, I'm not going to go all the way through, but let me give you a specific where it does work and apply extremely well, is in aviation. So as it happens, one of the few jobs that I do other than just this sort of thing, is I'm an advisory board member with a company called Zero Avia, zeroavia.com, if anyone wants to look it up.
Okay.
This is an electric aviation company
Yeah.
using hydrogen fuel cells, not
That's nice.
batteries. It is,
Okay.
and it works. And I think it has, you know, potentially, I certainly hope it does.
Yeah.
Because I'm involved in it, a very interesting future.
Okay. That's marvelous. And I think we had on just because we're talking more energy, and then, you know, again, from observation point of view, what do you feel is yes, we have to use a mix of, you know, energy sources, whether it's renewable, solar, wind, hydrogen, you know, all, and batteries. But what do you feel about nuclear? A bit not topical, but yes, how do you feel about nuclear to achieve achieve the targets? Because if we have nuclear, we can very quickly move. Yes, there's a gestation period of having a plant done, but there's something called, you know, the small nuclear plants, which are called, you know, which can replace microgrids, and they can, you know, manage your country locations, you know, 10 megawatts to 20 megawatts power plants. So what do you feel about nuclear as a product or energy mix?
Well, from relatively speaking, the little that I know, I would split it into two things: head and heart. My head says nuclear has a place in you know, the energy story of humanity going, you know, over the next number of decades and stuff, because we're in a race against time, and we need solutions and scale sort of quickly to resolve some of these things. So that's kind of, my head is saying that. My heart is saying not really no, because of the consequences of dealing with nuclear energy, nuclear power, and some of the challenges and dangers. And my heart says, you know, look at what happens with the fundamental energy provider on this planet, which is the sun.
You're right.
And that solar energy now is the de facto solution anywhere on the planet for the best cost
and that's nuclear
delivery of energy storage. You know, so you can't help feeling that for all the merits, and there are plenty for nuclear energy, solar energy is so quickly, you know, overwhelming that argument.
You're right.
that surely, you know, and you're in Australia, you know, so the thing in Australia, Dev, correct if I'm wrong, because I've only been there once, but you tend to get quite a lot of sunshine. It tends
very much.
It's
very
only
much.
a lot, isn't it?
Very much. It's nice sun. I think the state which I am in, the Western Australia, we have, you know, 10 months to 9 months of sun. So, and we enjoy the weather. We don't like going to the east side also, because in east it's a bit more chilly weather, and then, you know, it's just more on the, I think it's a lot of sunshine we have. We have a lot of sunshine.
Dev, you don't want to be here right now, my friend, because it's been minus 6 or 7. I'm looking out the window and there's snowing and it's frosty, and then it's damp, you know, for a lot during the winter, you know, and yeah, but we still get light. You know, the thing here about solar, I'm not going to try and pretend I'm a solar expert, but you know, what we're talking about here is sunlight. This is about light. It's you know, nature's had solar panels, of course, since the beginning of time. They're called leaves.
You're
you
right.
know, photosynthesis is,
it's
you know, and there's the thing again, Dev. Indigenous people around the planet, when you look at human history of the last 1,000 years or so, have always said the same thing. They said it then, and they said it now, and now we're agreeing with them, which is you have to respect nature, you have to use nature, and you have to understand nature
and complement.
And I think in modern times, so many people being detached from nature, living in towns and cities, and not even knowing how food grows. You know, we've lost touch with nature, and we're now reconnecting with it, because we've had to reconnect it with the pandemic. When you look at the power of a virus, someone was telling me the mathematics of some of this the other day. If you took all of COVID-19 on the planet right now, it would be about 6 milliliters. That's it. 6 milliliters has wreaked havoc across the planet. that's in volume terms, you think,
Yeah,
what,
that's nothing.
because that's just how powerful and extraordinarily
Yeah,
dangerous, a virus is. And but it's nature, it's a
you're right.
natural, thing. So
Mm,
we should use the natural power of nature
mm,
to help us,
mm,
and not do the things that are now, coming back at us.
mm.
And
This
because we've ignored the lessons of those indigenous people around the world.
You're right, and that triggers me another thought or a question for you. What do you feel in terms of the industry and the sector and the businesses? What's the from a nature point of view? Everybody has their own inert nature of a business, as in how they operate. You may call them ethics, you may call them morals, you may call them high level behaviors, or culture. You may call it. What's the single strongest impact on the culture or the ethics or the morals of organizations you have seen because of all these changes? It's more, and
Um,
I'm looking for more of a more soft or a subtle side of changes, not just technical, but not clinical, but a bit more, more soft skills kind of things.
I'm going to use one word, and I know a lot of people won't like it, like my answer: money.
Okay. Okay.
Money. But that's not a bad thing, and it's not I'm some capitalist fiend,
Yeah.
because I assure you I'm absolutely not. Um, uh, but there's a very good book that came out recently called Green Swans,
Okay.
subtitled "The Coming Boom in Regenerative Capitalism."
Okay.
And what that was illustrating, what it chronicles, what it describes and points to other books on, is that there is a huge opportunity here now for business, and
Hmm.
therefore people who work in businesses,
Hmm.
to develop more benign technologies and capabilities in tackling climate change, whilst at the same time building businesses and making money,
Yeah, you're right.
creating jobs, all those things. It's a myth that needs to be dispelled, that you know switching to cleaner technology, having a green, focused
Hmm.
economy on low carbon or zero carbon, is all about reduction,
Hmm.
cost, and diminishing things. It's certainly about change.
Hmm.
So when it comes to the coal industry, if you're in that, you're not in a great place, quite frankly. But over time, many things have come and gone. This is not, it's a cliched phrase, but change is a constant.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's.
Yeah. And
But so that's my answer.
yeah, that's a good one. And just to I want you to elaborate or talk a bit more on from the leaders you've been observing, business leaders or organization leaders and political leaders, what not just the money but the capitalism is fair enough. You have to have that capitalism which works for the people and for the investors, plus for the mother earth as well. So it has to have, and there's a new word, not a new word but an old word, but now being talked more like circular economy. So circular economy is a concept of connecting all the dots and nothing is left as a waste in the complete cycle. You have to backward integrate to make sure that everything comes. It's simple as bottling. When you're selling a bottled beverage, the bottle should come back to the or the person who's selling that beverage should be responsible for the disposal of the bottle. So which means they have to work on a supply chain which is more carbon neutral. So working towards carbon neutral supply chain or the value chain, which leads to circular economy. That's the concept. But there are many of these being talked about. Um, but what I was wanting to ask you is what do you feel the subtle changes in terms of leadership styles, the language, uh, because of all what has happened in the last 1 year.
Wow, that's a kind of big question in a way, because it depends where you are in the world. But let me give you my
Uh,
honest,
think about the West
straightforward
for
answer.
now.
Okay, well, no, actually, I'm going to split the world into two things: Asia and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So in Asia, you have lots of countries where you have a bit more command and control
Yeah.
in terms of government. They have typically managed the pandemic much better because they have been forceful, they have been firm,
Yeah.
and whatever. I mean, I know you're in a democracy living in Australia, and
Mm.
they've been pretty good.
Mm.
But then the Australians were pretty good 100 years ago with Spanish flu. They locked down the country and stopped anyone coming in. So
Yeah.
they learned a lesson and they didn't
Yeah.
forget. but to come back to my point, the irony, there's a big irony here, and it's a bit uncomfortable, but I'm going to answer your question. The Asia has typically dealt with the pandemic better because it's had a command and control system generally, and the general public, the populations have had to do what they're told, and they did, and they benefited from it. In the West, we don't have command and control. We have democracy, and we have a varying level of intellectual capability within politicians and within government. Yeah, and relatively speaking, it's inferior to over the last few decades. Asian governments and the organs of government have got more clever, with more clever people in them, and in the West, it's diminished. It's gone the other way, and so we haven't dealt with the pandemic very well. Partly because the population wouldn't take kindly to being told what to do in the same way they were told in Asian countries. So the bit here that's uncomfortable, if I might just finish on this, is that you might be thinking that you could say, this is where we're going to go with climate change. If we just ask people to stay at home, ask people to stop eating meat, ask people to stop flying, they might not. Some will, some won't. But we might have to say to people, this is what you're doing. This is how we cope with it. And it almost feels like this could be a rehearsal for how we're going to have to tackle climate change ultimately, which is going to be government diktat, where we're going to be absolutely, we can only do what we're told. And that's going to be a challenge in democracies. Easier in Asia, but we're talking about a global challenge, and we have to deal with it collectively. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's sort of, that is what that's what I'm feeling, that's what I'm sensing.
Yeah, I think that's not fair. This is a bit controversial there. It's difficult to push through in the West. It'll take a different sort of government to take that decision, because political leaders have limited time span, and then they always think about would I be able to come back in the next elections? So how difficult and easy. So the view is fairly short term. That's very myopic. But if everybody looked for longer term, that's when they thought of, what you are saying is right. Yes, let's solve it once and for all, and then let's work around a different solution where we can sustain the climate change and live in a much better life. I think with these questions, and I would want to give you, I want you to give some closing comments on overall, one good lesson you want to talk about before we close the podcast to our business leaders and the audience who's listening.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Well, first of all, thank you for hooking up with me. I really enjoyed talking with you. It's great to get ideas and talk to people from around the planet. I'd kind of finish on this. I think it's important to look at any problem, pretty forensically. Of course it is. Deal with not what you think it is. Get to the core of it. What is it? And there's a thing called Project Drawdown that's been around for a couple of years, and what this is an analysis of 80 aspects of human endeavor on the planet, and what the relative costs of those endeavors are in terms of CO2. So it quantifies these 80 aspects in CO2 terms, and some of it's tens of gigatons, and it rank orders the priority in dealing with them and the benefit in dealing with them in regard to tackling climate change. And it's quite a surprise, it was to me, and I think anyone that gets to see it, and it is being used now as a tool by people to ensure that we focus and deal with the right things. So to give you a quick flavor of a few things in the top 10. So the number one item to tackle climate change quickest and best is to deal with refrigeration, the efficiency and the use of refrigerants. Now that of course includes air conditioning, but many other things. That is the single biggest contribution to CO2 levels on the planet. Another one which would surprise people is the education of girls. So, around the world, because of the way we've been culturally, very different cultures, but typically and generally around the world, women and girls are second-class citizens, sometimes literally so in some countries. What does that mean? It means they don't get a great education. It means that their talents are too often dismissed, etc. And so they've quantified the
Yeah.
value of dealing with that issue in CO2 terms. Can you believe that? So I would say to anybody, look up Project Drawdown
Okay.
and make your own mind up from some of the things that are in that,
Yeah.
and maybe take it as a guide, but you choose.
Lovely. Thanks, Roger, for spending time with us and sharing your views. And we had a chat across range of topics. And I think for sure the audience will take something back. And I like the Zero Area company which you are part of. I look forward to reading more about it and listening from you. Thank you, Roger.
Thanks a lot, Dev. See you again sometime.
See ya.